Smite is pretty notorious for its hilariously unbalanced god releases. They've gotten better over the years, however, and those who have been playing Smite for only a couple of years or less will be blown away by how ridiculous some of Smite's older releases were. Hey, my name's Inter, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, then be sure to subscribe for all my content coming soon. Today, we're going to explore what, in my view, are the top 10 most overpowered and broken god releases of all time in Smite. For those who've watched my channel for a long time, you'll know that this is a remake of an older video I did almost 4 years ago now. That video covered only the top 5 and was made when I had less than 1,000 subs, so the quality is pretty horrible. That combined with the fact that we have definitely some notable releases to talk about in those 4 years that have passed since then, and I think it's well overdue for a remake. So without further ado, let's just jump in with number 10. Everyone knows Raid Shadow Legends by now, but did you know it's Raid's 2-year anniversary? That's right, it's been 2 years since Raid burst onto the scene and took over mobile gaming. In honour of the special occasion, the Raid team have a couple of questions to ask me. If you could date any Raid champion, who would it be and why? Shatterbones, do I need to explain? Where do you like to play Raid the most? Now, if you've ever seen me blasting out some release Tsukuyomi in Smite, you know I'm a bit of a meta slave. It's the same in Raid. Yeah, sorry. So looking through all the factions to find the strongest champions I can stomp some dungeon bosses into the ground with is pretty much my favourite thing ever. Now, with this being Raid's 2-year anniversary, there's a whole heap of events going on right now. They're all pretty dope, but for me, the clan versus clan tournaments look the most interesting. Being able to battle other players directly and see whose clan comes out on top sounds freaking awesome. So if you want to hop in on all the celebratory action, hit the link in the description or scan the QR code on mobile to get your epic Jotun champion to smash those dungeons with. Plus 3 ancient shards to summon extra champions and even more. Find your rewards in your inbox for the next 30 days only, and I will see you guys in the raid. So kicking off the list is release Sylvanas. Undoubtedly one of the most broken Guardian releases of all time, and definitely the strongest lane bully support in history. Release Sylvanas can mostly be summed up in 2 key differences from his present day release. The first is that his wisps could target minions, meaning not only did they damage enemy minions giving you extra wave clear, but they also healed your own minions, making his laning phase completely uncontestable. Seriously, you could pair Sylvanas with the lowest lane clear ADC in the entire game at his release and you would still dominate lane. But on top of that, his basic attacks would stagger minions on hit, which is no longer the case. The stagger effect will repeatedly interrupt enemies from attacking, causing them to never actually land a hit on your own wave. His basic attacks pretty much stunned the enemy wave. A combination of these 2 things, plus a few other parts of his kit that was much stronger, like his passive working on ranged basic attacks, made for an absolutely insane god release that made duo lane hell for a good while back in late season 1. So number 9 is actually one of the more recent releases on the list, so there's a good chance some of you watching have lived through this one. It's Baron Sandy. I'm sure some of you more recent players will be surprised to see the Suck Machine only at number 9, when his release was complete and utter misery for anyone not playing Baron. But as I said in the intro of the video, Smite's releases have gotten gradually more tame over time, and if Baron is the most OP release you've experienced, then you're going to be in for a wild ride later in the video. But don't get it twisted, release Baron was still a complete and utter shitshow and was arguably the most bloated kit of all time in terms of sheer numbers of effects he had just within 4 abilities. From his 1 dealing 2 times the damage it was supposed to his root still rooting people who were root immune, to his insane 50% damage mitigation during his ultimate, not to mention the massive damage it did and the fact that it had a 2-second stun at launch. Oh, and did I mention Baron's Brew just gave him extra power for no reason at all because of a bug? Well, it did. Release Baron was definitely a menace that is likely fresh in the minds of many of you watching, and to those people, my condolences. But moving on to number 8 for the list, we have Medusa. Unlike Baron, whose entire kit was pretty broken, Medusa was mainly overpowered because of just one completely and utterly busted ability. Don't get me wrong, her 180 degree acid spray and 50% slow on the ultimate were good and needed nerfs, but Viper Shot is in contention for the top 3 most broken abilities of all time, and it alone brings Medusa into this list. Viper Shot at launch gave 100% attack speed regardless of rank, so even at rank 1 you already had an on-demand Apollo passive, but each tick did 42 plus 15% scaling. With 4 ticks, that's 138 plus 60% per shot. With 3 shots you got at release, that's 504 base damage and 180% scaling. Just from this ability, that's not even counting the 3 basic attacks worth of damage, which is another 192 plus 300% scaling on top of that. So adding that all up, we get 696 plus 480% of physical power and damage she dealt almost instantly because of the ridiculous 100% attack speed boost. No joke, Medusa could literally 80% you at level 1 just using this ability when she's originally released. In the very next patch, this ability was nerfed in 4 different areas and was still insanely strong after that. Just crazy, and it's the main reason Medusa makes it onto this list. Swiftly onto number 7, we have Susanna. Another fairly recent release happening in mid-season 3, although maybe I'm biased in saying that's recent. I imagine a lot of you watching weren't around in season 3. But anyway, why was Susanna so strong? Well, much like Baron, it was pretty much that his whole kit was overpowered rather than one insanely broken ability such as in Medusa's case. The infamous Stormcatter had released 420 base damage and 180% scaling, plus the damage was front-loaded entirely on the first 2 hits. The dash dealt no damage at launch and it was all on the first 2, so you were free to dash however you please without wasting the damage of the ability. Oh, and on top of that, this ability would also activate on ability hit item effects such as Bluestone Pendant twice instead of once, so that's just even more damage on top. His 3 when you teleported was reduced to a 6-second cooldown at launch, so that was fun, plus it had more range. Susanna's ultimate at launch would knock up regardless of charge. Now he needs to charge it at least halfway to get the knock up. On release he can simply deploy and fire immediately for an instant knock up. Oh, and the cherry on top, release Susanna's passive was even more movement speed. Yeah, the god with 2 movement abilities and tons of lockdown needed a passive that gave him even more movement apparently. So yeah, that was release Susanna, just a bloated kit all round with every ability except his 2 needing significant nerfs after launch. We seem to have a bit of a pattern of going between gods with generally bloated kits and gods with one specific ability that broke them, because number 6 on the list is Gabe. No prizes for guessing which ability made Gabe release top 10, yeah, it was the shield. At release, Stone Shield gave the ally you shielded 400 base health plus 20% of Gabe's max health. Not the ally you put it on's max health, Gabe's max health. So even if Gabe had 3000 health by late game, which is honestly a pretty conservative estimate, you could build way more than 3000 if you wanted to really abuse this. You would give the ally 400 plus 20% of 3000, which is of course another 600, so 1000 health total. This ability gave your backline carries half a health bar on top of their normal one, in addition to the CC cleanse. And it even lasted longer than it does now at 6 seconds, so waiting it out wasn't really an option. And as I said, if you really wanted to, you could abuse this even more by building Gabe with 3500 plus max health. There were some other strong things about release Gabe, like point blanking people with his 1 did way too much damage, and his ult did 50% current health instead of 35% now, but it was mostly the shield that broke release Gabe. So now we reach the top 5, and this is where it gets pretty ridiculous. Nemesis is the first to crack top 5 with her completely busted release back in open beta. Gabe and Nemesis being next to each other in the list is actually quite fitting, as Nemesis released directly after Gabe and was the second god release I ever experienced, Gabe being the first. You can imagine my pain, I'm sure. Nemesis though was substantially more OP than Gabe in my opinion. There's so much to unpack with this release that I'll just list off some of the major things that made Nemesis so strong here. 100% scaling on both her 1 and her 2, a 50% slow on her 2 regardless of rank, even at level 1 this slowed for 50%. The shield was on a 12-second cooldown instead of 18 seconds and worked on Fire Giant and Titans. The slow and movement speed increase on the ultimate was 50% instead of 25%. Slice and Dice's cooldown was just 7 seconds. The shield had infinite HP and could absorb as much damage that was thrown at it. This was a big one, as release Nem players would intentionally walk into Vulcan ults just to do 600 damage back to the Vulcan and heal for 600 themselves. Yeah, needless to say, Nemesis was a force to be reckoned with at her release and definitely deserves a top 5 placement. But we just keep getting even more broken. At number 4, we have a god that would frequently have taken both duo lane towers within 5 minutes, release Sol. There's a hell of a lot to talk about with Sol, given pretty much every part of her kit was batshit insane aside from her ultimate. She was a strange release in that her ultimate was probably her objectively worst ability. So we'll start with her passive. This is still one of the strongest passives in the game, even today, but at release it had 35% bonus damage instead of 20%, and a 33% power and attack speed increase instead of 25 and 30% respectively, which is what it is now. This passive basically allowed her to use only basic attacks and still win trades, not to mention her insane tower pressure with this. Her 2 was also a huge problem though. As you may know, Sol's 2 used to count as a basic attack, and so it would proc on-hit item effects like Polynomicon. However, you may not know that at release it would proc them on both hits of the 2 instead of just once. So with Poly, this ability did an extra 150% of your magical power on top of its normal damage. Seems fair. This ability would frequently hit harder than a lot of mage ultimates. It was absolutely ridiculous at launch. And finally we have her 3, which is arguably the strongest part of her release, though that's tough to say as her 2 and passive were also completely insane. It's hard to overstate that. Her 3 at release though had haste, so her basic attacks didn't incur a movement penalty while she was using this. It also cleansed slows and roots, and stunned enemies when the trail detonated. Yeah, Sol 3 is another one of those abilities that is still strong today despite a myriad of nerfs hitting it over the years. It just proves how completely broken Sol was at release. And here we are, the top 3. It's been a long and harrowing journey, but hopefully you're still with me here. Ratatoska is the first to break top 3 with his ridiculous 6 dashes from one cast and busted release acorns. Yeah, you heard me right, 6 dashes. Rat's original dash would go through enemies instead of stopping on them like it does now, and if he went through a god, it would reset the cooldown, meaning he could dash again. He could only do this once per god per cast though, he couldn't just dash forward and back through the same god 6 times, it had to be different gods he was hitting each time, but this was still completely insane. Especially when you combine it with his most broken acorn at release, Opal Acorn. This one added lightning bolts to the side of the dash, both widening the hit area enormously as well as applying on-hit effects like Golden Bow, the old version of Golden Blade, Frostbound Hammer, Crit, and anything else you can imagine. So yeah, release Rat could dash 6 times through your entire team, critting, slowing, and doing AoE damage the whole time. That honestly sounds like an entire god kit or at the very least an ultimate ability, but this was just his dash. Other acorns like Emerald, which gave on-hit healing from the 3, and Sapphire that gave a sticky bomb effect to the 3 were also broken and took nerfs, but in comparison to the Opal shenanigans, they seemed kind of balanced. But don't get me wrong, if the Opal acorn didn't exist, these acorns would be top tier and completely broken. We could talk about the rest of Rat's kit and how it was slightly overtuned, but to be honest, it was mostly the acorns and the one that completely broke this release. Alright, top 2, let's go. Number 2 is a god that could literally play all 5 conquest roles to a top level at release. No joke. That's release Bolana. This is one you may well have heard of even if you didn't play back in Season 2, but let me tell you, I was playing back then and boy was it a fun time to be a solo main, even if it was hell for every other role. So Bolana's Scourge is pretty good, right? 45 health back every 3 basics, really nice for sustain, 2.2 second disarm, cool. Well, at release this was a 3 second disarm and would heal for 110 per 3 basics. 110. I have no idea how this even made it past basic internal testing at high res, never mind the PTS phase. But it did and was released to this state in the live client. At this stage, the best strategy was to completely ignore Bludgeon regardless of the matchup and just rank up Scourge because no one could box you once you had this maxed out at level 9. You heal to full health every single minion wave. Also, a funny bug at the time that was in a similar vein was that Bolana's hammer basic attacks lifesteal for the full amount instead of the normal 1/3 for AoE lifesteal. So you could build lifesteal and crit and heal for absurd amounts with a single basic attack on a minion wave using the hammer. This wasn't abused anywhere near as much as Scourge at the time though. Her passive gave double the movement speed it does now, making her pretty much unescapable, and also gave a lot more protections. Her ultimate was on a base 55 second cooldown for some reason. It's definitely on the stronger side for an ultimate and has no reason to be 35 seconds faster than all other ults, but it was for some reason. And the final main thing for release Bolana was that her 1 would build block stacks from minions, so it was as simple as dashing at the minion wave and gaining 3 block stacks instantly, and you could outbox literally anyone, including late game hunters with ease. Bolana was absolutely terrifying and arguably unbeatable in the hands of a good player at release, and I highly doubt we will ever see a god as strong as her ever again. I think high-res have learnt their lesson from this one. But there is one she fears. In their tongue he is Dover cunt. Taolu born! But before we get into the mind-bending insanity of release Guan Yu, we all know by now that most of Smite's releases are OP, and so I have a few honourable mentions that were still completely broken at release but didn't quite make the top 10. Khepri with his 50% mitigation 2 and insane ultimate, Tsukuyomi with his everything, you were probably around for this one so I don't think I need to explain. Kernanos with his ridiculous steroid and ult that was the size of a lane, Fenrir with his crit brutalize, Artio with her insane lockdown and damage, Hell who I've heard had some insane alpha build that was never released to the public, but I can't find any information confirming this or any solid numbers, so I'm just giving her a mention for this one. And finally Erlang Shen with his root cripple 2, full speed turtle and insane damage. But let's dive headfirst into the cow shit that was released Gwan the Bongo Man. This release was far above even release Bolana in terms of brokenness, and even in the early stages of Smite, I have no idea how this ever got through. Anyone with more than 3 brain cells could look at this kit on paper and tell you it's fucking dumb. You didn't even need to go in game with this. Release Gwan was a Guardian by the way, so all the scaling values I'm listing here are in magical power. So to start, his 3 was a walking mini Anubis ult. It did 600 plus 200% magical scaling in total. For reference, Scylla's ultimate does 800 plus 120%, so probably similar damage or even less depending on the stage of the game. And this was just Gwan's 3 that was on a 13 second base cooldown. Speaking of cooldowns, his 1 and his 2 both had 6-second cooldowns, which in itself is completely absurd and should never have been a thing, but when you heal an ally or damage an enemy with these respectively, they reduce all of your cooldowns by 2 seconds, including that ability itself. So already they're on 4-second cooldowns by default because of the 2 seconds you get off, and go down to 2 seconds if you use both of them right after each other. So you heal dash, they're on 2-second cooldowns. Yes, a 2-second cooldown AoE team heal with 50% scaling, and a 2-second cooldown dash that did great damage and slows enemies. And keep in mind, that's without any CDR. If you factor this in, then his 1 and 2 literally had no cooldown. Since CDR applies first, that reduces the cooldowns to 3.6 seconds from the base 6 cooldown. Then when you cast both abilities, that takes 4 seconds off, and they have a negative 0.4 second cooldown. Yeah, I'm not joking, they had no cooldown. I hope you're starting to see why I say that even release Bolana was nothing on release Gwan. Anyone who tries to compare release Gwan to anything else is completely bullshitting. And finally, Gwan's release ultimate was present day Amaterasu's ultimate, but way better. It did more damage, dealing 900 plus 135% magical scaling and damage, keeping in mind that magical power typically comes in much larger numbers than physical power, so this damage is completely insane. Plus, it would slow for 2 seconds on the first hit, silence for 2 seconds on the second hit, which prevented them jumping or dashing out of the third hit, which stunned for 2 seconds. And keep in mind, that's all in a massive AoE as well. Yeah, release Gwan was hands down the most overpowered god we have ever seen in Smite, and I'm sure some of you have heard of him even before watching this video. Hopefully this has given you a little bit more perspective on the matter. If you want any more in-depth information on these releases, then definitely check out my release god history playlist on the channel. I'll have that link down in the description as well, as I have individual 8 to 12 minute videos covering most of these releases in there. But other than that, I'll catch you guys in another video later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.